Hi guys, so today's video is going to be a series review for the Arc of the Scythe trilogy by Neal Shusterman. The series review is going to be non-spoiler, so even if you haven't read the first one, you won't be spoiled for anything. At the very end of the video, I will do a little tiny bit of a spoilery chat for the third one, The Toll, because I need somebody to talk to. But aside from that, it'll be completely spoiler free, and when I do get to the spoilers, I will let you know, I'll warn you. The setup for this trilogy is that it's our world, but in the future, where the Cloud has gained sentience and is known as the Thunderhead. With this AI development, we now have conquered death. The only thing that threatens mankind is overpopulation. We have tried to expand, we have tried to go outside of the Earth, and all of those endeavors have failed. So we are stuck here on Earth, and because nobody seems to die anymore, we are kind of running into this issue of eventually the planet can't sustain us. This is where something known as the Scythedom is formed, which is a group of individuals who are trained in the art of killing, and they are revered by society. They are the only individuals who are essentially self-governing and are outside the jurisdiction of the Thunderhead. The main goal of the Scythedom is to ensure that overpopulation does not happen, and essentially by killing some people, which they call cleaning, in the long run they are helping mankind stay alive. But they're supposed to do this honorably, they are supposed to do this with a heavy heart, they have rules and regulations, but there are some people that feel that the Scythedom, they all deserve to enjoy their professions. They think that these rules and regulations are very limiting and they don't actually do mankind any good, and that's kind of where you start to see some tension and some antagonists come into play. Some stories are defined by their heroes and some are defined by their villains, and this trilogy I think had a fantastic combination of both. In some ways, the Earth itself is sort of like an antagonist because the Scythedom can't quite keep up with the amount of people that are being born and staying alive, and so no matter what they do and how they try to regulate it in a way that is honorable, they're not actually able to really, for the distant future, have a solution. They're trying their best, but they're kind of stuck. But the more obvious and very in-your-face villain is one that a lot of people, they like their villains to be extremely complex. They don't like evil for the sake of being evil. I do think the villain in this story is one that leans more toward evil for the sake of being evil, but not quite. While I certainly never sympathized with the villain, I didn't feel bad for them and think, oh, they're just misunderstood. I definitely think that they felt real. They felt like a dictator. They felt like somebody who was able to make a name for themselves because they are charismatic, because they are able to kind of sweep people along with their twisted ideology. They're able to make people see their sides of things, and you as the reader sitting back, you can't help but think, wait, this person's crazy though, how can anybody believe this? But when you look at history, there are a lot of people that are like that. So this person feels like people we see nowadays, people we've seen in the past, and people we will probably continue to see in the future, which is why I think that they are actually a pretty terrifying villain. As for our heroes of the story, I actually think that our heroes are the kinds of characters that you look at, you root for, you want them to succeed, but also, most of our heroes, you find them within the Scythedom. The first book, we follow a very honorable Scythe of what is now known as the Old Order. The Old Order are the people who believe the Scythedom should maintain honor, while the New Order are people that are like, we should be able to like this whole killing people thing. This particular Scythe from the Old Order, who is honorable, he takes on 2 apprentices to try and train to become new Scythes, and that is where you kind of see our main characters getting into the Scythedom. You really, in the first book, primarily explore that side of things. Because the Scythedom is run under its own governing body, it is not affected by the AI known as the Thunderhead, which oversees every other thing in the world. It feels a little bit more tangible. It feels more like something you can relate to as opposed to the rest of the world, which you do explore in the other books. So in the first book, I think it's a fantastic way to kind of get you into the world, get you introduced to what is a very futuristic thing that can be kind of hard to latch onto. It gives you bits and pieces of it so that when you go to the second one and the third one and you start to see just how different the world is, you feel like you're already acclimated to it. Our 2 main characters are Rowan and Citra, the Scythes apprentices, and they don't really want to be scythes themselves. They don't really have a desire to go around murdering people for work. In a strange way, you could say that our two main characters are the resistant heroes, that sort of a trope where they don't really want to fall into their place, but they have been picked and so they must do it, except for what they're doing is kind of awful, but also it's the only solution for keeping mankind going. I do think that the first book is the most character-driven of the three. You really get to know Rowan and Citra. After that first book, you start to see more of the world. I would say the second one is probably the quirkiest when it comes to the things about the world that are out there. Everything is basically taken care of for everybody by the Thunderhead. In the first book, you get, before the chapters, you often get Scythe journal entries, which can be very bleak and depressing, but in the second one, you start to get the thoughts of this AI. And something that I really appreciated about this story is usually in any kind of futuristic storyline, AIs are always seen as these evil things that end up twisting and turning on humanity. And in this case, the AI's sole purpose is to help mankind. And so it's really nice to see an AI that genuinely cares about people, but seeing it reflect on things, seeing it look at mankind, and even though it has all this knowledge, it still doesn't know what it's like to be a person. Weirdly enough, it ends up being one of the most human things about the story. And I think having these, before the chapters, having these thoughts of the AI presented to us and getting to see how the AI sees humanity is very fascinating. I really liked it. And then, like I said, you see within the story how the world has changed in that second book. And some of the things are just super hilarious. Neal Shusterman for sure has a great sense of humor. Within the third book, I do think that it is a little bit more similar to the second in its approach, where it definitely feels more omniscient than the first one, which I think makes sense. The AI isn't supposed to be interfering with the Scythedom, and the first one focuses more on the Scythedom. So you focus more on people, and it is more character driven, and then you get into the next two, and this sense of being omniscient very much fits with the fact that you are getting far more of the AI. The AI is basically a character, and you get so much more of the world. You start to see how all these crazy things that you were not expecting to play a role end up playing a role. And I think that when you read the first one, you really don't see the bigger picture at all, but clearly this author, there are so many little things that they put from the beginning that if you're the kind of person that likes a great payoff, you're gonna see it in the third one. The last thing I want to touch on is the writing style. A lot of times when I talk about this trilogy, I mention that the writing style is pretty straightforward, and I actually think it serves its purpose very well because so much of the book presents all these existential, oh my gosh, what's it mean to be alive kinds of questions. I think that if he had written it in a way that was different than how he chose to write it, I think it would have felt less accessible. But I think this is a kind of thing that a lot of people can have really interesting conversations about. You can have really great discussions, and you can just reflect on some really significant things that aren't just within this trilogy, but you take some of these themes and you can think about them in our own lives. It's much bigger than just this story, a lot of the themes, in my opinion. And so I really appreciated that he wrote it the way he wrote it, because I feel that somebody who is 12 or 13 can have a conversation, can have ideas about the things presented in this book just as easily as somebody who's much older. On that note, I do want to get into some spoilers for the third book. You don't want any spoilers because you probably don't want these spoilers. Don't keep watching. Stop watching now. When I read the second one, if you're curious to see some of my thoughts on the second one, because I had quite a few, I'll go ahead and link my review and chat for that one down below, but I'm just gonna stick with spoilers for this third one. There are a lot of little moments throughout the book that I really enjoyed. The first one I want to point out is the Thunderhead, when it was Jerry, for that little brief moment. Oh my gosh, I was just so sad for the Thunderhead because I wanted to be a person. I wanted to be able to be a person and live a nice, happy little life because it's so sweet and wholesome. Even though it's kind of sort of steering people in a direction that ends up resulting in lots of people dying. But that's kind of the whole thing with this story is, what's good, what's evil, how do we define it? So it's so innocent in a way, even though it was kind of also messed up that it took Jerry's body, even if it was only for a brief moment. Also, it's like a hint creepy that it likes to watch Grayson sleep, but still, when it like touched his cheek and it was just so excited about how everything felt because it had never experienced it before, I was like, aw, poor Thunderhead, I'm sorry that you're so alone. And speaking of being alone, when Grayson deems it unsavory and it's all by itself and it's like, I am all alone and I will have to take care of mankind anyway, and it has, basically it cries through like the storm clouds, which is maybe a hint cheesy, but also I'm like, again, I was just so caught up in being like, the poor Thunderhead. So I'm curious if you guys are like, no, it was really messed up, I didn't feel for it at all, or if you're like me. There are a few other scenes that were also super touching in my opinion. When Faraday sees Citra again and he just breaks down crying. Ugh. And I really liked the ending for him where he kind of continued this, where he for so long had to do something he didn't want to do, but it was supposed to be for the betterment of mankind, but then that was able to finally become something that was more meaningful because he got to soothe people instead of scare them because he was coming to kill them. Instead, it was like he was going to be able to put them at peace. I loved that ending for him. Talking about endings, Rowan and Citra. I didn't know where this was going to go. I didn't know if they were going to go down in a crazy blaze of glory and save the world, but ultimately die. I didn't know if it was going to be like a repeat of Thunderhead, except for permanent. I was scared. I didn't know what was going to happen to them. I love tragic endings, but I was weirdly, I feel like I would have been upset if they didn't get a good ending because these poor two young little souls deserve to, I think the biggest thing is they were basically never together. They grew to love one another through the hardships that was the first book, and maybe it was a little insta-lovey, but they definitely went through some crazy stuff. And then they were apart, and they just kind of had to think of each other. They barely ever saw each other in the second one. So a lot of the third one, I'm like, please, let them be together, let them be together. And nobody ever listens when she was like, Rowan is not to blame. He's actually a good guy. All of you are fooled by Goddard. And even the people that don't like Goddard were like, well, but he's also Scythe Lucifer. You know, he killed a few Scythes. Yeah, some of the Scythes are bad, though. Can we just listen? He's a good guy. And then that was so aggravating that whole book, they were so close to being together, and then they, boom, were apart. So at the end, I was like, please let them be together. I didn't actually want a tragic ending, as much as I love them. I didn't want something where, like, they finally get to be together by dying. I'm so glad that's not what it was. And they got to go to their little planet. And the fact that, like, his tears fall down a little slower because the gravity's different and the sky is a different color. I will say it bummed me out that, did he have to make him wait 117 years? He couldn't have just let them be on this ship happy. He had to still throw in a little bit of a wrench. They had their happy ending, but Rowan had to wait a really long time for it. Not as long as poor little Astrid, though. I felt so bad for her, and I thought it was so cute how hard she argued for the Tonists, and that was something that, when it was presented in the first book, I thought the Tonists were just, here's what the religion looks like of the world. I didn't really expect them to play such a big role throughout the trilogy. I really liked how that was woven into the story. I thought that was really interesting, really fascinating. The part where Goddard changes the definition of a bias just so that he can purposefully persecute certain groups, that's the kind of stuff that I think makes him such a great villain, because so many people, they really do get pulled along with his craziness, and you're so frustrated, but then you can't help but be like, that's what some people do. But anyway, Astrid, getting back to her. It was so cute that she argued so hard for the Tonists, and then she had to wait 1,600 years, just her and what is like the Thunderhead 2.0. Man, that sucked. I feel like she should have been allowed to basically go to sleep and then wake up. That would have been, poor lady. I felt so bad for her. Also, I'm curious, how many of you noticed that this is the tuning fork that goes down like this? Did you guys notice that right away? Were you like, oh yeah, I noticed that immediately? Or were you dumb like me and didn't notice it until way after you probably should have noticed it? Anyway, that will be it for my spoilers. I could probably go on and on and on about that third book, but I'll cut myself off. I really liked it. I hope if you haven't picked it up and you plan on picking it up, I hope you really love it too. But anyway, I would love to know all of your thoughts on this trilogy. I had such a good time reading it. And anyway, I'll see you guys later.